Hey guys, tonight we step into a place where the air feels thicker than it should, as if every breath you take has already been whispered by someone before you. You're in a medieval town after sunset, and the streets are mostly empty, save for a few clattering hooves on cobblestones and the occasional lantern bobbing in the hands of a watchman. You make your way down a narrow lane that smells of damp stone, candle wax, and the faint tints of stale ale. At the end of the street looms a large timber-framed hall, its windows dark except for the occasional flicker of orange light. You push the heavy door open, and inside, torchlight licks across carved beams, throwing long shadows that stretch like cloaked figures against the wall. A hush settles over you. This is no tavern. This is a guild house, part meeting place, part sanctuary, part stage 4, mysteries that few outsiders ever glimpse. The moment you step across the threshold, you can almost hear the echo of vows spoken here, secrets traded, and rituals enacted. You probably wouldn't survive long if you wandered into this hall as a real medieval outsider. Suspicion alone could be enough to brand you a spy, and spies have a way of disappearing. But lucky for you, you're just drifting through this scene in your imagination, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and the local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hall smells faintly of resin from the torches, the sharp iron tang of tools hung neatly on the walls. This isn't just a meeting place for secrecy, it's a workplace too. Many of these brotherhoods began as guilds, where bakers, masons, or weavers guarded not only their trade secrets, but their rituals of belonging. You can almost see the tools, chisels, hammers, loom standing as silent witnesses to the rituals about to unfold. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval guilds really did maintain layers of secrecy, both to protect trade knowledge and to foster group loyalty. Joining was no casual affair. You didn't just show up with a resume. There were ceremonies, oaths, and often a long apprenticeship before you were allowed in on the deeper mysteries. Quirky tidbit. Some guilds were so protective of their secrets that they reportedly held meetings in underground chambers or remote fields. Imagine trying to plan your work schedule around that. Sorry, can't make dinner. I have to go chant in a ditch with my coworkers. Historians still argue whether these initiation rites were truly solemn spiritual ceremonies or whether they were partly theatrical bonding, exercises part intimidation, part team-building exercise, with a touch of drama. What's clear is that the secrecy worked. Outsiders gossiped endlessly about what went on in guild halls, but the details stayed inside. Locked away like a recipe with one missing ingredient, you sit quietly on a bench along the wall. The door creaks shut behind you. The voices drop too. A murmur, and the torches crackle in their brackets. The room seems to hold its breath, and you realize you're not just an observer tonight. You're about to be drawn into a story of shadows, vows, and whispered brotherhoods, where every flicker of fire hides another secret. Asterisk, the door closes with a solid thud, and the room seems to fold around you like a cloak. A dozen figures sit at long wooden tables, their faces softened by candlelight, their hands resting on rough-hewn boards. One man rises broad-shouldered, with a robe of russet wool draped over his tunic hand. You can feel the weight of his stare. He clears his throat, and suddenly the low chatter vanishes. You're not here as a guest anymore, at least not in the eyes of the Brotherhood. Tonight you're treated as if you were a potential initiate, one step away from joining the circle. And that means one thing: oaths. Mainstream fact. Secrecy oaths were at the very heart of medieval guilds and brotherhoods. These weren't casual promises. They were solemn, often sworn on relics, holy books, or even on the tools of the trade. To break an oath wasn't just betrayal of a group. It was seen as inviting divine judgment. You didn't just risked your soul. Quirky tidbit. Some initiation rites included mock threats of gruesome punishment for oath breaking, like having one's tongue cut out or being buried alive. Were these ever carried out? Historians are skeptical, or likely they were dramatic flourishes meant to make members think twice before spilling secrets. It's basically the medieval version of What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, just with a lot more threat of eternal damnation, historians still argue. Whether these ceremonies were primarily spiritual experiences, or more like legal contracts dressed up with candles and chanting, the ambiguity made them powerful. You could never be entirely sure how much was symbolic and how much was deadly serious. Your lead toward the center of the hall. The floor creaks under your boots, and the air smells faintly of beeswax and incense. A book lies on the table, its cover bound in cracked leather, its pages rippling with the years. The master of the guild gestures for you to place your hand. Upon it, a voice begins reciting an oath. The words thick with formality. Loyalty to the Brotherhood, obedience to its leaders, silence about its secrets. Your promised fellowship, protection, and the shared strength of the group, but only if you bind yourself with your word. The candles sputter, as though the air itself tightens around the vow. You glance around, and every face is watching. You, waiting, measuring whether you'll speak the words. Some look stern, others almost amused, like they remember the night they stood where you are. One of them leans forward and mutters under his breath, "Remember? Break this, and it won't be us you'll fear. It'll be him." He tilts his head upward, toward the rafters where shadows coil, and you realize he means God, or at least the idea of divine wrath. It's both unsettling and oddly comforting. On one hand, the threat feels heavy. On the other, it binds the group together, reminding you that everyone in this hall has walked this same path. Every handshake, every shared meal, every whispered word, they all rest on this fragile, invisible web of promises. And as you murmur the oath back, in a low voice, you sense it wrapping around you like a net, a silence that speaks louder than words. You stand very still, letting your eyes adjust until the torchlight stops wobbling and the lines on the walls come into focus. At first, they look like scratches, careless scrapes left by ladders or tool handles, but when you get closer, you see intention. A triangle nested inside a circle, 8, 2 crossed lines ending in tiny forks. A fish-like shape whose tail flicks into a neat spiral. The master touches one with a calloused finger and says, softly, "Marks." The word lands in the hush, like a pebble in a pond. Marks, not letters, not pictures, but something in between. Private alphabet learned with hands as much as eyes. You trail your fingers along a shallow groove and feel the stone still cool. From the day's chill, the cut is deliberate, steady, the depth almost musical under your fingertip. Somewhere behind you, a log pops in the hearth, and sparks flit upward like tiny comets, making a quick escape from gravity and rules both. Mainstream. Fact: medieval stonemasons and guild craftsmen often carved mason's marks or merchant marks onto blocks, timbers, and ledgers. These served as signatures for payment, quality control, or assignment. And you can still find them today on cathedral piers, bridgestones, and old city gates. Not every mark was mystical. Many were the medieval equivalent of signing your homework so the foreman knew who to pay. The master leads you to a heavy oak post, where the light slides across carvings like water. You see a baker's peel crossed with a wheat stalk, a tailor's. Shears, a set of key symbols for trades, yes, but also for belonging. If you recognized the sign, you knew who kept watch here. If you didn't, it was just decoration that the carpenter had gotten a little too enthusiastic about. Half logo, half lullaby. Medieval branding, but without the jingles. Count that as your first gentle joke. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz. On a bench nearby lies a slate smeared with chalk. A journeyman crouches, drawing a clean arc with a compass, and then snapping a straight edge through it. He doesn't look up when he speaks, lines are. The first oath, he murmurs. Cut wrong, and the stone tells on you forever. You watch as he scores a small emblem in the corner his mark. Quick and practiced, then brushes the dust into his palm like he's pocketing a secret. Quirky tidbit. Some cathedrals hide more than marks. In quiet corners, stonecutters left doodlesteiny. Ships, stick figure knights, even grid boards for games scratched into cloister benches. Archaeologists have found medieval roof tiles with the paw prints of cats who trotted across wet clay, oblivious to the foreman's schedule. You like to imagine the guild blaming the accident on an uninitiated apprentice of the feline persuasion. The master brings you closer to a pier where two marks overlap, a diamond tipped with a cross, and beneath it, a forked trident. He traces each gently. This one is Guillaume's, he says, and this Martin's. Guillaume set the bed. Martin lifted the course. The story sits inside the wall the way grain sits inside wood, quiet, but permanent. Stacked through an entire nave, these little emblems become a chorus of names without letters. A roll call sung in stone. Historians still argue whether some marks carried protective magic in addition to bookkeeping, whether a circle land cross. Near a doorway was just a tally, or a quiet spell meant to turn bad luck aside. The written records are coy, the stones are coy. Even the guild rules, where they survive, seem to smile and say, "We're not telling." It's the kind of debate that warms historians through long winters and gives tour guides something delicious to whisper. You drift toward a side room, the air cooler, the floor dusted with chalk and sand. Here, on the flagstones, someone has drawn a web of lines. Full-size arches set out in ghost geometry. Curves intersecting like ripples in a pond after two stones meet by accident. A tracing floor, the master explains where complex profiles are plotted at 1-to-1 before a single chisel touches stone. You step over a chalk rib and feel absurdly worried about smudging it, like you're about to ruin a fresco with your shoe. Relax, every apprentice has done worse. One probably sneezed and erased a vault in his first week. The master lifts a square and a set of dividers from a chest and places them in your hands. The metal is cool, the weight honest. Tools like these are the quiet priests of the craft holding. Angles steady, stretching arcs again and again, until stone remembers how to be a curve. You sight along the square's edge and watch the room straighten itself, as if the building knows it's being examined and decides to behave. A younger brother points out marks burned into timber. A chevron here, tripled there, he explains. That on large frames, each beam was scribed and numbered with a system of marks so the whole could be assembled on site without guesswork. Think of it as the medieval version of a flat pack kit, only with fewer tiny Allen keys to lose and more. Shouting across a yard. Gentle joke number 2. You're doing great. The master leads you to the doorway, where shallow cut lines bloom like frost patterns. Which marks? Someone whispers apotropaic signs scratched to guard thresholds. Daisy wheels interlaced. Circles overlapping V's for the virgin labyrinthine. Little mazes where the story goes. Evil wanders until it forgets why it came. Were they the brothers doing? Or the householders? Historians still argue, but you feel the intention in your fingertips. The human wish to make danger take the long way around. Outside, the rain has left the alley glossed and dim. Over the lintel of a neighboring house you spot a merchant mark part. Spear, part letter, part flourish carved, just deep enough to outlast gossip. That mark could write invoices, brand crates, guide a porter through a crowded quay. In a world before street numbers, before neon, a scratched sign served as a lighthouse. If you knew it, you were home. If you didn't, perhaps you weren't. Meant to step inside. Back in the hall, a chest opens with a clunk. Inside, wax tablets scored with shorthand loops. A length of cord knotted at patterned intervals. Small wooden tally split down the middle, the two halves matching perfectly. When reunited, the steward smiles, fitting the tally together. Accounts, he says, but the way the two halves kiss makes it feel like more than math. It's parts of a secret rejoining to become true. Someone sets a rough-hewn board on trestles, and you can just see shallow incisions along its edge, tiny notches counting years. Deliveries, votes, or perhaps initiates who spoke their vows in this room. The record is wordless, but it hums with memory. The way a lullaby hums, even when no one sings. You think about the oath you whispered a little while ago, how it felt to let words braid themselves around your breath. These marks are the same oath, carved into matter. They don't speak, but they keep the promise. To work square, to keep counsel. To recognize your own across distances, measured not in miles, your but in emblems. Before you leave, the journeyman hands you a scrap of chalk. Every mark is a door, he says. The right eyes can walk through. You sketch the simplest thing, a small circle crossed by a single line, and feel a flicker of ridiculous pride. Like a child signing a drawing no one will ever frame. The mark will be swept away before dawn, and that's fine. Tonight, you joined a conversation older than ink, where stories travel not by sentences but by grooves, shallow as a fingernail. You look once more at the wall where Guillaume and Martin left their emblems nested like sparrows under an eave. The torch throws gold into the cuts, and for a heartbeat, the marks seem to glow. You realize that in a world where memory can be treacherous, this is how you stay quietly, stubbornly in the stone, and because history is generous with its little jokes, you notice a final carving low by the floor, a tiny shoe with an oversized buckle, tucked where a kneeling apprentice might hide it. A private smile left for knees and curious eyes alone. Consider it the medieval equivalent of a wink. There's gentle joke number 3. You made it. The master douses one torch. Another. The hall darkens, and the marks slip back into shadow. But you carry them with you. Now their hush, their purpose, their tidy refusal to explain themselves. A cupboard creaks open, and out come the fabrics, the kind of textiles that look humble by daylight, but turn downright mysterious by torch glow. The steward lays them across a trestle. Coarse russet wool for warmth, deep indigo for gravity. A strip of saffron-dyed linen that seems to drink the firelight and give it back warmer. You're invited to run your fingers over the weave. It's not finery, it's workwear with opinions. But here, in this room, where oaths still buzz like bees, even a plain robe becomes a costume that knows its lines. Someone lifts a hood, soft, thick, with a crescent cut where shoulder meets neck so it falls just so. A pair of eye holes. Narrow. Deliberate stare at you from a simple linen visor stitched to the edge. We don't hide, the master murmurs. We focus. You slip the hood up and feel the world hush by a few degrees, like snow beginning to fall. Your breath warms. Your cheeks, the torchlight becomes a ribbon. You see Lysanne somehow notice more. Gentle joke. Number 1. The hood also spares you the awkwardness of remembering everyone's names. On a peg near the hearth hangs a different sort of face. A light oak mask carved with almond eyes and a small neutral mouth, the surface rubbed, with beeswax until it gleams. It isn't a carnival villain, and it isn't a saint. It's a plain human face, smoothed to quiet. The master fits it in his hands the way you'd test a well-balanced hammer. Equal faces, he says.
When
we speak, it's the craft speaking. You think of Guillaume and Martin's marks from earlier, the way the stone remembered them without blushing or boasting. The mask is a cousin to that memory. The person recedes. The role holds steady. Mainstream fact. Medieval brotherhoods and guilds didn't just work, they performed. Many sponsored processions and mystery plays, and their livery-matching gowns, hoods, or color-stern tradesmen into choruses on the civic stage. When a guild processed through town for Corpus Christi or a patron's feast, the spectacle mattered. Robes and badges told the crowd who guarded bread, who raised roofs, who stitched sleeves. We tend to call it pageantry, but for them, it doubled as identity, insurance. And advertising rolled into one. A chest yields more theater. Staves topped with little carving skis. Shears, a square and compass, a baker's peel handled. Like scepters, only slightly embarrassed to be scepters. There's a canopy of blue cloth, too, stiffened with slender rods. When 4 brothers hold it aloft, it becomes a small sky under which important moments can occur. The staging is modest but careful, like cooking with 3 ingredients you trust completely. On the table. A cluster of long candles sit in iron prickets, each trimmed to a different height. Steps, says the steward. He sets them in an arc. Tallest at the center, shorter toward the ends, so the flames ripen from seedlight to harvest and back again. You catch the idea without being told. The room will rise and fall with the flame. And you'll be walked through its seasons without moving your feet. From a shadowed corner, comes a sound like the sea inside a shell. A brother traces a rosand, bow along the rim of a clay bowl, coaxing a low, singing hum. He smiles, amused at your raised eyebrows. Quirky tidbit. Medieval staging loved simple machines for wonder sheet, tyrant for thunder, spinning wheels for wind, handfuls of powdered resin tossed onto embers for cloud. One very serious-looking carpenter demonstrates the wind machine, cranking a barrel wrapped in parchment so it growls softly. He looks pleased enough to patent it, if only patents existed. The master calls quietly, and the room answers with movement. That feels less like choreography than memory. Two men draw a length of chalked cord through their hands. The kind you saw in the tracing, floor marking off beats, as if the cord were time itself. Another places a wooden square upon a stool, points its angle toward the door, then toward the hearth. You catch the sense, again without a lecture. You're stepping into an architecture of gestures as exacting as any arch. The robe isn't just clothing, it's a line in a larger drawing. Historians still argue whether particular colors and props in these rites carried fixed meanings or shifted by place and century. Was indigo always gravity, or simply what the dyer could afford? Did a hood equal humility, or anonymity, or both? The records give you footnotes, the rooms give you goosebumps. Somewhere between them, significance breathes, a bell tinked inks. From the far end, no church peal, just a small handbell with a clean voice. Brothers rise, arranging themselves in a half circle, each with a robe tied by a cord and a badge pinned over the harda, tiny mark in metal, cousin to the ones in stone. The master walks the ark, adjusting a hymn here, a fold there, the way a clerk might align columns on a ledger. Realize the staging is gentle bookkeeping for bodies. We enter as variations. We're laid out as a line. A narrow bench now becomes a threshold. Two candles flank it. Single chalk circle glows faintly on the plank itself. The steward taps it with a fingertip. Gate, he whispers, and the word makes the hair rise on your arms. You recall the apotropaic scratches at the doorframe. Outside the witch marks, like labyrinths for bad luck, and feel a private echo. The room is about to draw a doorway, and you will be asked to step through it. Not yet your blindfold and tests belong to what comes later, but the stage is dressing the threshold so your feet will know where to pause. From the cupboard emerge gloves plain, undyed, with fingertips that have known lime and dust. One pair is placed near the square, another by the compass. The gesture is almost comical in its tidiness, like setting out hats for invisible guests. Gentle joke number 2. There's exactly a 0% chance any glove here fits your modern hands. Perfectly. Medieval sizing ran on vibes, but the point hums beneath the humor. Clean hands, clean tools, clean entry. There's a short rehearsal of silence. It's not emptiness silence like linen stretched and waiting for the first stitch. The master raises his hand, the wind barrel stills, the bell's echo thins and disappears into the rafters. You sense how much of the rite resides not in words, but in these breath-held gaps. The mask turns every face into a candle-calm oval. The robe hushes the body's rustle. Even the floor seems to listen. Mainstream fact settles again beside your shoulder. Confraternities lay brotherhoods dedicated to charity and devotion. Also used robes and hoods, especially in processions and penitential rites. In cities from Florence to Seville, their livery made members legible in streets crowded with trades, shrines, and politics. Did guilds borrow from them, or did both dip into the same well of Christian theater and civic display? Historians still argue, and you don't mind. The uncertainty makes the candles brighter. The master steps to the chalk circle, and with a small knife, scores a fresh line through it, steady and smooth. He lays the blade down, as if returning a word to a sentence. Everything he says, not loudly, but so each syllable lands, has its use and its meaning. When the use is finished, the meaning remains. You feel that sentence slip into your pocket, though, as usual in history. The pocket does not exist. Gentle joke number 3. Medieval robes tragically lacked phone storage. Someone lowers the blue canopy. The half circle tightens. The candles lean, whispering their thin songs. You're not masked yet, and you're not blindfolded. But the room has removed just enough of the world to make what remains matter. The robe's weight settles your shoulders. The mask on the peg seems to watch without judging. The props rest where hands will find them by feel alone. You're reminded of the tracing. Floor again, the full-size curve drawn in chalk before the stones are cut. This is that drawing, in wool and wood and flame. Soon enough, the tests will come. The steps across thresholds. The tasks that make your knees think before your mind catches up. But staging is the quiet oath beneath the louder one. An agreement to be held by form. To trust a pattern older than any single pair of hands. When the bell sounds again once, twice the room exhales. The steward gathers the gloves, the master nods, and the brothers let their shoulders drop. You feel curiously refreshed, as if a draft had been sealed, and the hall now keeps warmth a little better. The robe is just cloth. The mask is just wood. Yet both are more than they were an hour ago, because you now know what they're for. The master closes the cupboard. Next he says, "We ask whether your feet can follow what your eyes can't see." You look at the chalk circle, faint and bright all at once, and understand that the theater is not for spectacle, but for steadiness, the kind that doesn't need applause to know it worked. The master's words linger in the hall, their weight pressing down like a second cloak. The candles burn steady now, but the air carries that peculiar stillness you recognize from places where something is about to happen. Your eyes dart toward the chalk circle on the floor, the bench that has suddenly become a gate, and the folded blindfold resting on a small stool. You know, without being told, that the next part of the evening is not about robes or props, it's about you, or rather about the testing of anyone who dares to step across. Mainstream fact, initiation tests were common in medieval guilds, confraternities, and secret brotherhoods. They weren't always grueling or dangerous, but they were meant to impress seriousness upon the new member. Blindfolds, symbolic ordeals. Even small physical challenges were used to jolt the senses and mark the transition from outsider to insider. They served as thresholds, both literal and symbolic. A brother gestures for you to come forward. The blindfold is lifted linen soft, with a faint scent of smoke and salt, as though it has been near the hearth too many times. When it drops over your eyes, the world collapses into darkness. You can still hear the torches hiss, still smell beeswax, but vision is gone. And suddenly your ears are greedy for every creak and shuffle. Quirky tidbit some early accounts describe. Initiates being made to stumble through mazes of furniture, or asked to step over obstacles they couldn't see, sometimes even over nothing at all. The point was not humiliation, but trust. Learning to follow the guidance of the Brotherhood. It's almost comical if you picture a group of burly carpenters tiptoeing through a choreographed obstacle course. But in the moment, it must have felt like your soul was walking a tightrope. "Step forward," the master intones.
Oh, you obey.
Feeling the floor uneven beneath your boots. One step, another. Suddenly a hand rests on your shoulder, steady, reassuring, and then pushes you gently sideways. You stumble, catch yourself, and hear muffled chuckles from the circle. It's not cruel laughter, more like the chuckling of people who've walked the same path and know that wobble is part of the design. A voice asks, "Do you trust what you cannot see?" You're not expected to answer aloud. The silence is your reply. A hand lifts yours, places it on something rough and wooden, the square. Another guides your other hand to the compass. You feel their edges, sharp but familiar, and realize the tools themselves are now part of the test symbols of craft. Control and balance. Historians still argue whether these blindfolded ordeals were rooted in genuine spiritual symbolism, or whether they were just pragmatic ways of fostering obedience and humility. Some scholars see them as echoes of religious ceremonies, death, burial, and rebirth reenacted in miniature.
Acting.
Others insist they were closer to theatrical hazing, bonding through shared awkwardness. The truth, as always, probably lies somewhere in between, but tonight, you don't get the footnotes, you get the sensation itself. You're turned slowly, like a compass needle being aligned. The blindfold tugs lightly against your cheek as someone ties it tighter. Then comes the sound of a chair dragged across the floor, the scrape echoing too loudly in your ears. You're guided forward again until your knees nudge wood. "Kneel," the voice says, and the floor cools against your shins. The stone feels alive, thrumming faintly beneath the soles of your feet. As if centuries of initiates have left their weight behind, something metallic clinks near your head, perhaps the square being placed upon the stool again, perhaps a knife, laid down for drama. A whisper slithers across the circle. Break the oath, and may the tools turn against you. You shiver, knowing it's just theater, but also knowing how theater can seep into bone. Then, unexpectedly, laughter bursts gentle. Communal, the kind that warms the chill. A hand pats your shoulder. "Rise," the master says, the solemnity melting just enough to remind you this is, after all, fellowship. They test you not to terrify you, but to prove that you can stumble, bow, kneel, and still stand again. As one of them, the blindfold lifts. Torchlight floods back into your eyes, dazzling, almost holy in its brightness. Every face in the circle is turned toward you, solemn again, but softened, as though your awkward steps and near stumbles have woven you into their memory. You realize the test is not about passing or failing. It's about crossing a threshold that no one crosses alone. You breathe deep, catching the mix of smoke, resin, bread still clinging from the evening's meal. The world feels larger now, not smaller, as though the blindfold had been a wall and you've just broken through. The master nods once, curt and approving, then gestures toward the bench. The next stage waits, but you already know. You have stepped from stranger into initiate. Asterisk. The circle loosens, and the room exhales into the kind of bustle you only get when ceremony hands the baton to supper. The benches scrape, shoulders unknot. Someone cracks the shutter just enough to let a ribbon of cool night air slide along the floor. You're guided toward a long board already set with trenchers, rough pewter and a loaf whose brown crust looks like the roof of a tiny, well-baked cottage. The blindfold print still tingles on your temples, but the smell of stew does its own. Gentle magic beef, onions, a prickle of pepper, and the lemony ghost of sorrel. A brother touches your sleeve and nods toward the head of the table. "Not yet," he murmurs. "We eat when we speak." You catch the rhythm of it at once. This isn't a meal you fall upon. It's a meal that begins you, the way a line begins a drawing. Mainstream fact: medieval guilds and confraternities were famous for their feasts. Many held annual dinners on the feast day of their patron saint. Others gathered quarterly or at the admission of new members. These meals did real social work, settling disputes, collecting dues, arranging charity, for the poor or for widows of brethren. Eating together wasn't relaxation tacked onto business. It was part of the business. The master lifts a shallow cup silvered on the inside, so the candlelight turns the wine into a small sunset, and everyone stills as easily as a pond at dusk. To the craft that makes strangers neighbors, he says. The phrase is simple, but it lands with a pleasant thud in your chest. Cups rise and tilt. The wine, probably more honest than refined, moves, like a warm line down your throat. You realize the toast is a hinge. The door into supper swings upon it. Now the platters come, cheeses with stubborn rinds. Radishes like little red moons. A smoked eel regarding you with the frankness of a colleague who has done his part and would now like to be appreciated. Gentle joke number one. You nod back, as if to say nice work, because diplomacy extends to fish. A trencher of pottage arrives, and a brother ladles it with the solemn care of a librarian handing over a rare book. Quirky tidbit, some English guilds and colleges kept a loving cup, a two-handled vessel passed along the board. Custom said the drinker stood to sip, while the neighbor on either side rose. One to present, one to guard his back in echo of rougher times when benches lived closer to knives. The result is a choreography of small bows and shared attention, half courtesy, half comic shuffle. You try it and nearly miss your handle. Your neighbors steady you with the kind of gentle competence that suggests many cups have been saved from dramatic exits. The steward leans near your ear. Listen. For the countersign. You tilt your head, and hear it phrases folded into toasts like herbs into broth. Health to the square that keeps us true, someone offers, and a low answer comes back, and to the line that brings us home. You don't need a glossary. The room supplies the meaning. Tools become virtues. Bread becomes agreement. Even the salt pinched from a small wooden trencher feels ceremonious. A white sparkle of covenant. Historians still argue whether such coded toasts were widely formalized or mostly local inventions. House style rather than universal law. Surviving ordinances drone on about dues, candles, and fines for arriving late, but say little about the poetry of the board. The omissions are almost charming. The records keep account of pennies and leave the warmth to memory. A brother breaks the great loaf with both hands, not cutting, but parting. He sets a heel by your plate and whispers, "For luck," which may or may not be policy, but certainly tastes like it. Another walks the table with a bowl of mustard so sharp it could discipline a wayward apprentice. Gentle joke number 2, your sinuses see eternity for a moment and return chastened. The eel, the cheese, the stew they circulate with. A rhythm that feels practiced enough to be music. Between courses, the master lifts a smaller beaker. For those absent, he says. Voices soften, a few heads bow. You didn't expect grief to sit so comfortably beside pepper and laughter, but it does. The names he speaks are brief, like marks cut into stone. Guillaume, Martin, and there's your quiet callback. The cup makes its unhurried round. When it reaches you, you don't know these men. Yet the sip tastes like belonging to a story big enough to borrow you for an evening. A lad at the far end too young for a beard. Old enough for blisters launches into a short song, a working tune about hauling beams and keeping the joint tight. The refrain invites response. The table answers in low gravel. The verses are practical and silly at once, packed with reminders. Mind your plum, or plums, you'll eat alone, and the kind of shop humor that only tools understand. If mystery plays filled the streets by day, these are mystery plays' smaller cousins, performed in breadcrumbed robes, with grease on the cuff and mirth doing the stage direction. Mainstream fact adds itself again, like a courteous footnote. Many confraternities required members to fund lights and loaf for the poor, and some feasts ended with alms distributed at the door. The eating built the feeling. The feeling funded the charity. You imagine a low basket near the threshold, the one you crossed so nervously earlier, now catching coins that sound like promises when they land. The steward taps your cup and nods. Toward the master, another formula rolls out, gentler than the first. To peace at the bench, he says, and courage at the edge. You taste the words as much as the wine. Peace at the bench, the patience of cutting true, the grace too. Let another's measure stand. Courage at the edge. The willingness to take the first shaving off a stubborn stone. To trust the geometry you chalked in quiet. You file both away with the square and compass touch. You can still feel ghosting in your palms. A dish appears that looks like a custard and behaves like a sermon sweet. Spiced, a little excessive, which is exactly the point. Hippocras, someone says of the wine now sugared and scented with cinnamon. No. You sip and feel your shoulders slide one notch nearer, the bench back. Outside, the lane hisses with a light rain, and the shutters tick as they drink the weather. Inside, the candles lean into their later selves, stubbier or golden. Historians still argue whether this banquet grammar grew from tavern habit, monastic refectory rules, or the civic theater of processions, whether the guild borrowed from the church, or the church from the guild, or both from the street where life makes its own liturgy. The debate is pleasant because all roads here feel honest. Wherever the form began, it does its work. You arrived as a question. You are leaving as a sentence that makes sense. Someone pushes a final plate. Your Wileman's candied to a glassy crackhand grins. For clear sight, he says. Another sets a tiny wedge of a very quiet cheese and calls it wisdom, which is either an old joke or a new truth. Gentle joke number 3. You resolve to eat more wisdom in your daily life. Preferably with mustard only half as ambitious as tonight's. The master rises one last time. The hall attends the way a compass attends its north. We came hungry. he says, "for bread and for measure. We have eaten both." He sets his palm on the board as if blessing a beam before it's raised. Keep counsel, keep craft, keep one another. The words are plain, which is why they land. Cups touch wood not loudly. Benches ease back. Someone snuffs the shortest candles with wet fingers. Someone else caps the longer with tiny irons so they can serve another night. You help gather trenchers and feel the simple rightness of being useful in a room that just fed you. As the door opens and the cool slides back in, you catch a last glimpse of the chalk circle by the bench gate, faint now under a dusting of crumbs. A threshold crossed. Twice eyes covered, then hands full, out in the lane. The rain has become a mist that powders your robe and makes the torchlight bloom. You walk a few steps and realize you are humming the refrain about plum and plums. Behind you, someone lifts the loving cup back to the shelf. Its handles show two small polished crescents where fingers have agreed over years to stand guard. The feast hasn't explained the brotherhood so much as let you taste it. Salt, song, shared phrases, the way a toast makes a room one body, the way a loaf passed down becomes a line passed on. Step into the night feeling fed and steadied as if the stew carried iron and the words carried light. The night outside has teeth, but the warmth of the feast still clings to your shoulders like a second cloak. Rain hushes along the tiles above, the lane slick with glimmers of torchlight caught in puddles. Brother beside you leans close and murmurs, "Not all doors are opened with a key." You half expect him to hand you a riddle, but instead, he presses your palm briefly in his, fingers curling in a strange, deliberate sequence. You blink, and he smiles faintly. Remember, mainstream fact. Medieval fraternities and guilds often developed secret passwords, handshakes, or gestures. These weren't whimsical flourishes, they were practical. When traveling between towns, a mason, carpenter, or merchant needed to prove his bona fides to local chapters. In a world without passports or LinkedIn profiles, a whispered phrase or an oddly timed grip on the hand could mean the difference between welcome and suspicion. You try the handshake again on your own fingers. It feels peculiar, like weaving. An unweaving rope. You realize it isn't meant to be obvious. It's designed to pass in plain sight, disguised as an ordinary greeting. If someone watching doesn't know the key, they'll see only courtesy. If they do know, the door opens quietly. Quirky tidbit. Some accounts mention grips that mirrored the very tools of the trade. One handshake pressing a thumb to mimic the hinge of a compass, another aligning fingers to echo the square. It sounds almost comical, like a carpenter giving jazz hands, but the cleverness is undeniable. When your whole life is tools, why not make them language? The master returns, his steps slow and measured, and gathers the circle near the hearth again. A small coffer sits on the floor beside him, flips the clasp, opens the lid, and draws out a slip of parchment folded many times. It allowed he only shows it, then places it back. Words matter, he says, but in some places, words are not safe. You think of the oaths sworn earlier, the candlelit promises carved deep in air, but now the emphasis shifts. These aren't grand vows meant to ring out like bells, their small passphrases whispered like secrets behind shutters. The cup is never empty. The master intones. The brothers answer in low chorus, because the hands are never idle. The exchange is quick, rhythmic. A call and response tuned to slip unnoticed through tavern noise or market chatter. Historians still argue whether these passwords were consistent across Europe or merely local flavors. Was there one universal lexicon of grips and words, or did each guild improvise its own? Surviving documents are frustratingly vague. Some describe elaborate rituals, others only hint at certain signs and sayings. The gaps, as usual, are where your imagination crawls in and gets cozy. The steward beckons you, and once again, your hands are guided. This time, though, no blindfold, only precision. A brother grips your hand, places your thumb just so, presses your palm flat, then withdraws. You mimic it back. Clumsily at first, but repetition smooths the awkwardness. Soon, you're passing. And receiving the gesture in rhythm, it's like learning a new melody. It feels faintly absurd, tracing secret handshakes in a smoky hall centuries from home. Yet there's a charm in it too, a reminder that even serious brotherhoods had a streak of play. Gentle joke number 1. You imagine an entire guild line dancing in handshakes, like some medieval jazzercise class, and have to swallow a laugh before it escapes into the solemnity. One by one, the brethren demonstrate variations. A subtle double tap on the knuckles, pressure at the wrist. A phrase spoken low, almost swallowed. Light at the bench, answer, shade at the stone. Cadence is soothing, like a lullaby hummed with the hands. You realize you're not just learning movements. You're being folded deeper into belonging. Mainstream fact returns to ground. Records of operative stonemasons in the Middle Ages do suggest such signs existed, though exact details are scarce. Later in speculative societies like Freemasonry, these signs and grips blossomed into elaborate systems. Whether those modern echoes exaggerate medieval practice or preserve a faint memory remains hotly debated. Historians still argue whether continuity exists or whether romantic imagination simply embroidered the gaps. The coffer is closed. The master places it under the bench and sets his hand flat on the lid.
Knowledge.
Without use, he says softly, rots like bread unshared. The brothers nod and you feel the phrase lodge itself alongside others you've pocketed tonight. Then, like a magician lowering tension, someone thrusts a tankard into your hands. For practice, he grins. You look baffled until he extends his palm in the secret grip. You nearly drop the drink trying to return it properly. Gentle joke number 2. Clearly, coordination is a future elective course in the Brotherhood curriculum. Laughter rumbles, warm, forgiving. The hall relaxes again. And you notice how seamlessly solemnity and humor mix here, one moment cloaked in silence. The next, jostled with a joke about ale and awkward grips. It strikes you that secrecy is not always heavy. Sometimes it's as light as a wink across a noisy room. Before dispersing, the master adds one final exchange. He looks at you directly. If you forget everything else, remember this. Brother greets you with open hands. He spreads his palms, then closes them gently around yours. You return with steady grip. The lesson is simple. Openness offered, steadiness returned. It's not just a code, but a posture toward the world. The fire pops, scattering sparks like small stars. Someone draws the shutters tight, and the hall dims into a cocoon of orange and shadow. You realize you've just walked through another kind of threshold. No blindfold this time. No chalk circle, only hands meeting hands in trust. And for the first time tonight, you think, maybe secrecy isn't about hiding. Maybe it's about protecting the small, fragile spaces where trust can grow. The fire settles into its long sigh, the logs collapsing inward like tired shoulders. Around you, the brethren lean closer, their voices dropping to that soft, conspiratorial tone people use when they want their words to hover just above a whisper. The master gestures to a chest tucked under the altar-like table at the front of the hall. 2 men haul it into the circle, their boots grinding against the stone. The lid creaks open, and the smell of old linen and waxed wood drifts out. One by one, objects are lifted and displayed with reverence. A scrap of bone, yellowed and smooth. A fragment of cloth edged in gold thread. A tiny vial with something like dust clinging to its corners. You realize you're watching a ritual of show and tell, but this is no child's game. These relics, however ordinary they might look in candlelight, hold the gravity of centuries. Mainstream fact. Medieval brotherhoods often tied their initiation, rites to relics or religious borrowings. It gave their gatherings spiritual legitimacy. A kind of halo borrowed from the church. A bone might be claimed as that of a saint, or a scrap of cloth said to have brushed against a holy shrine. Whether authentic or not, the mere presence of such items draped the ceremony in awe. The steward holds up a jawbone, no bigger than your palm. For speech, he says solemnly. The others murmur in agreement. You feel a small chill, part wonder, part discomfort. Quirky tidbit. Some confraternities even borrowed relics from local churches just for feast days or initiation nights. The parish priest might lend a saint's finger, carefully wrapped, in exchange for coin or favors. Imagine checking out relics the way you might check out a library book, Due back before Sunday Mass, please. A brother unfurls a faded banner, painted with a cross flanked by curious symbols, half mystical. Its edges are singed as though it once brushed fire. This cloth hung in our hall when the plague passed us by, he declares, and suddenly you feel the banner's weight multiply. Whether it truly warded pestilence or simply outlasted it, the memory woven into its threads is heavy enough to bend the air. Historians still argue whether such relics were believed literally powerful, or whether they worked more as psychological props, anchoring courage in dangerous times. Were the bones truly holy? Were the banners genuinely protective? Or were they stagecraft, wielded by leaders who understood the human hunger for the tangible? The debate, like the relics themselves, is enduring. The master steps forward, drawing from the chest a peculiar object a length of iron, bent into a loop and sealed at one end with a waxy red mark. He places it gently on the table. It's a circle, he says simply. The men nod, as though the iron itself holds a secret language. You lean closer and see small scratches etched along its surface, not random, but deliberate. Symbols, letters, perhaps, or marks so old their meaning has slipped like sand through time. The iron catches the firelight, glowing orange at the edges. You realize it's not the object itself that matters, it's the belief it represents. The Brotherhood is showing you their spine, artifacts that keep their stories upright. Quirky tidbit, not all relics were somber. Some guilds kept tokens like carved wooden animals or even whimsical charms believed to chase away evil spirits. One record tells of a mason's lodge that stored a small figurine of a cat used in a mock ritual of chasing vermin before serious oaths began. You picture it in a grizzled men bowing gravely to a tiny wooden tabby before swearing eternal loyalty. Gentle joke number 1. The cat probably took its duties more seriously than anyone else. The chest's contents diminish, but the mood grows thicker. You feel the silence shift into something almost sacred. The way churches feel when the hymn is ended but no one yet dares move. The relics lie between you and the circle, a bridge of objects, anchoring invisible ties. The master picks up the jawbone again, presses it briefly to his forehead, then sets it down. Let your words be weighed, he intones. The relic has transformed from bone to command. A brother brushes the banner against his shoulder, muttering a short prayer under his breath. Another dips a finger into the dust of the vial and marks a cross on his chest. You're invited forward. The iron circle is placed in your hands. It's surprisingly heavy, cold even in the warm hall. Your palms sweat around its roughness. You half expect it to vibrate, to hum with unseen force. It doesn't, of course, but the stares of every man fixed upon you give it the gravity of thunder. Mainstream fact. Relic rituals served as performative theology in miniature, bridging craft with the sacred. By touching the object, you weren't just swearing loyalty to the group. You were tying yourself into a cosmic network where the saints, angels, perhaps even God himself nodded in approval. Historians still argue whether the church knew about or tolerated these practices. Some bishops turned blind eyes, others railed against frivolous relic displays, yet the evidence suggests these ceremonies thrived, quietly nestled in the corners of faith. Neither fully sacred nor entirely secular, the iron circle is taken. Back, the chest closed with a low thud. For a moment, the hall feels empty without its relics. Then someone clears his throat and mutters, "If only the saints could drink with us." Laughter bubbles, shattering the solemnity. Gentle joke number 2. You imagine a skeleton at the feast, politely declining mustard but requesting another round of hippocras. A brother leans toward you and adds in a quieter tone, "Don't be fooled. The relics matter, but it's us our hands. Our oaths that carry the weight." His eyes shine in the firelight, and you realize he's right. Objects may bind, but it's people who hold the knot. The chest is slid back into shadow, out of sight, but not out of mind. The hall exhales. Again, benches creak, and mugs appear as if conjured. Relics or no relics, the living Brotherhood has work still to do. The chest has been tucked away, but its echo lingers, Like the phantom scent of incense after Mass, you're still thinking about the iron circle, the jawbone, the banner with scorched edges when the master raises a hand. The chatter dims, replaced by a hush that feels heavier than silence. This time you sense what's coming isn't about relics or meals, it's about testing. Mainstream. Fact, medieval brotherhoods often wove trials into their initiations. These weren't mere hazing. They were designed to measure loyalty, courage, and obedience. Some were practical reciting rules, handling tools with care. Others leaned toward theater, symbolic ordeals that imprinted lessons in memory. A bench is cleared at the center of the hall, and two brothers bring forth a narrow plank of wood. It's not long, not dangerous in itself, but it's balanced atop. Two stools wobbling precariously. A blindfold is produced again. You groan inwardly, you thought you were finished with that. Particular accessory, but laughter rustles through the room at your expression. Every brother walks the edge, someone mutters, before he can claim the floor. You're guided up, blindfold tied, the plank beneath your boots feeling as narrow as a castle wall. Of course it's not if you fell, you'd only bruise. A shin-butt perception is the real test. Your arms stretch outward, palms open, searching for balance. Quirky tidbit. Some records mention initiates being asked to walk along a beam, while others required them to carry a full cup without spilling, or to answer questions while blindfolded and poked with feathers to break concentration. In other words, medieval people had a sly streak of game show inventiveness long before television. The hall is full of mutters, whispers, and one exaggerated gasp that makes you sway dangerously. A hand steadies you at the elbow. Easy, a voice says kindly. The plank shifts beneath you, not by accident but by deliberate nudge, reminding you the Brotherhood can as easily test as support. Historians still argue whether these ordeals symbolize spiritual vigilance, humility, or just served as entertainment to liven up a solemn night. Were they moral lessons disguised as games, or games elevated into morality plays? The truth, as usual, probably wandered somewhere between. You make it across, boots touching stone with a relief so palpable, you exhale audibly. The blindfold comes off. The hall greets you with restrained nods, the kind you give a child who has just carried a candle without burning down the house. A cup is pressed into your hand, a reward sip. Warm and spiced, steadier than applause. Another. Test follows quieter. You're asked a question? If a brother lies, what should you do? The answer isn't obvious. Voices murmur. Some suggest punishment, others silence. You recall the toast earlier? Keep counsel. Keep one another. So you answer softly. I remind him of the oath. The master inclines his head. It's not about being correct. It's about being thoughtful, aligning your words with the thread already woven tonight. Quirky tidbit again. There are hints in some town. Archives that initiates were once asked to name the tools of virtue, listing squares, compasses, chisels, as though each embodied a moral quality. Imagine fumbling that test. Hammer means honesty. Still, the symbolism stuck. Tools became metaphors, a vocabulary of morality in wood and iron. You're drawn into a final mock trial. A brother steps forward, pretending to be an outsider demanding entry. He speaks in a strange, jumbled accent, exaggerated like a street performer. You and another initiate are told to challenge him, to demand the words and grips you learned. Earlier, it feels almost comical, like medieval improv night, but it works. The outsider fails the countersign, and laughter ripples. More importantly, you and your fellow stand shoulder to shoulder, guardians of the invisible line. Historians still argue whether such skits were genuine rehearsals, for real threats like infiltrators or spies, or merely bonding exercises. Either way, the effect is clear. You're no longer a guest, but part of the defense. The fabric, the tests end not with a proclamation, but with a bowl of water set on the table. The master dips his hands and lets droplets fall. Are washed, he says. Then he dries his fingers on a plain cloth, not ornate, just serviceable. The point is humility, not spectacle. You mimic him, dipping your own hands, the cool water cutting through stew grease and wine. The gesture seals what words and jokes and planks could not. Mainstream fact slides in again. Water purification rites weren't just Christian borrowings. They appeared in many medieval traditions: washing hands before feasts, before oaths, before communal prayer. Cleanliness wasn't only about hygiene. It was about readiness, a way of saying, I arrived to this moment unsoiled, even if my boots are muddy. As the bowl is taken away, a brother claps your shoulder. Past, he says warmly. The hall releases a collective sigh, the tension dispersing like smoke. Benches scrape, laughter bubbles anew. The plank is carried off with exaggerated ceremony, like a dragon slain and no longer needed. Gentle joke number 1. Someone bows to the plank, whispering, well fought, noble beam, before setting it against the wall. Gentle joke number 2. Another pretends to stumble dramatically beside the water bowl, proving the trials never truly end. Gentle joke number 3. When your cup is refilled, you mutter, this is my kind of test. And several nod vigorously in solidarity. And as the evening deepens, you realize the trials weren't about proving strength or wit. They were about weaving you tighter into the brotherhood, giving you stories to laugh about later, reminders of thresholds crossed, asterisk. The air in the hall has shifted again. The laughter lingers like smoke, but beneath it is a deeper hum, a resonance that suggests tonight's final act is near. You notice how men who had been joking moments ago now sit straighter, their cups resting untouched, eyes fixed on the master at the head of the room. His hands are folded on the table, but when he rises, even the fire seems to hush. Mainstream fact. Many scholars believe that the initiatory traditions of medieval brotherhoods did not vanish with time. Instead, they flowed forward, shaping the ceremonies of later organizations, especially the Freemasons. Its passwords, handshakes, symbolic tools, even the very structure of initiation rites found echoes in those later societies. Whether direct inheritance or mere coincidence is still contested, but the resemblance is difficult to ignore. The master begins to speak of lineage, not in terms of blood or family, but of continuity. One generation's oaths carried forward, reshaped but not abandoned. We are not the first, he says, and we will not be the last. His voice is steady, but there's something in his tone that feels like he's speaking across centuries, as if he already sees you sitting in some future hall with others, repeating the same motions. Quirky tidbit: early Freemasons and their speculative heirs often traced their traditions back to King Solomon's temple, whether or not that was historically accurate. For medieval craftsmen, it may have been less about Solomon himself and more about claiming an ancient, noble pedigree. If your brotherhood can say, our roots are as old as Holy Scripture, then suddenly your local guild hall feels like a cathedral. The brothers around you nod in rhythm, the way a congregation might during a familiar sermon. The handshakes you learned, the relics you touched. The blindfolded walk across the plank hall of these things begin to knit together, threads in a larger tapestry. You realize the tests and feasts weren't random, they were language designed to be passed on. Historians still argue whether such traditions were deliberately secretive to protect their members, or whether secrecy became a kind of intoxicating habit, a way to make the ordinary extraordinary. Was the handshake ever really necessary? Was the jawbone truly holy? Perhaps not. But secrecy itself, the act of keeping, created the glue that bound people together. The master now leads a final calendar response. His words are plain, but heavy with meaning. What is kept? He asks. Is kept, the brethren answer. What is shared is strengthened. The circle closes, and you hear your own voice joining theirs without hesitation. It feels almost like singing a lullaby you've heard it only once, yet it slides out as though you've always known it. A candle is extinguished, then another. Ash! Shadows swell in the room until only the central flame of the hearth remains. The master dips his hand into a bowl of ash and presses it lightly to your brow. Marked, he says simply, not condemned, not exalted, just marked as one who belongs. The ash is faintly warm, smelling of pine and smoke, and you resist the urge to wipe it away. Quirky tidbit: some guild records describe initiates being sprinkled with flour or chalk dust rather than ash, symbolic of raw material being prepared for shaping. Imagine the solemnity of a ritual suddenly interrupted by someone sneezing a cloud of flour all over the hall. Gentle joke number 1. You picture a whole row of initiates looking like ghostly loaves of bread. With the ash cooling on your forehead, the master steps back and gestures for you to rise. The ceremony is complete. No fanfare, no trumpets, no great spectacle. Just a quiet acknowledgement that you have crossed from one world into another. You glance around and realize the brothers are smiling, not wide grins, but the subtle smiles of men who have seen this moment many times and still find it worth honoring. The hall begins to stir. Benches shift, cloaks are pulled tight. A few men gather near the fire, murmuring plans for tomorrow's work. Another fills cups again, though. The mood is lighter now, more like friends lingering after prayer than conspirators cloaked in mystery. You realize the Brotherhood has two lives: the solemn, cloaked in ritual, and the ordinary, where laughter and spilled ale are as binding as any oath. Historians still argue whether these societies truly wielded power in medieval towns, or whether they were more about fellowship than influence. Were they secret governments, or just tight-knit clubs with excellent bread recipes? The truth, as with most history, is probably more boring, and yet, when wrapped in torchlight and secrecy, it feels profound. You step outside at last. The air is cool, the stars sharp above the gabled rooftops. The village sleeps, but you carry with you a weight that feels both secret and shared. The rituals, the handshakes, the relics, they're not just curiosities of the past. They are proof that even in a world of mud and candles, people yearned for belonging, for meaning, for the feeling that they were part of something that stretched beyond the horizon of their own lives. Gentle joke number 2, and perhaps also proof that people have always enjoyed making newcomers walk wobbly planks. Gentle joke number 3. As you walk home, you catch yourself practicing the handshake in the dark, only to fumble and nearly smack yourself in the chest. It seems the learning never ends. The night folds around you, but the memory of the hall glows steady inside. You're no longer a stranger. You are part of a chain, unbroken and quietly luminous. Asterisk, the road ahead is empty, yet it doesn't feel lonely. The hush of the night has softened into something like a lullaby, the creak of wood settling in distant cottages, the muted drip of water from a rain-swollen gutter, the faint rustle of leaves that seem to breathe in time with your own. You keep walking slowly, boots brushing against loose stones, and you realize your pace has matched the rhythm of your thoughts, slower, gentler, stretching out like a ribbon across the quiet. The village behind you is dark now, shutters closed, fires reduced to glowing embers. But the warmth of the hall still lingers in your chest, like a small coal you carry without effort. The secrets you witnessed tonight, oaths whispered, relics displayed, handshakes exchanged, no longer feel heavy or forbidding. They feel like threads, fragile but strong, woven into the fabric of human history. People, then as now, craved belonging, meaning, and a sense that the invisible world was just as real as the visible. The Brotherhood gave them that: rituals to ease fears, symbols to bind trust, jokes to lighten solemnity. You take a deep breath, the cool air filling you with calm. The stars above seem distant, eternal, yet not indifferent. They're the same stars the brothers once looked to as their candles sputtered low, the same sky under which vows were sworn, planks were crossed, and laughter rose like prayer. Your step slow even further, until you find yourself nearly still. The night is patient. It asks nothing but that you rest. So let the imagery fade. Now the hall, the relics, the handshakes, the whispered oaths, let them drift away like smoke into the rafters. What remains is the quiet, the steady hum of the night, and the reassurance that secrets, like dreams, can simply be carried gently into sleep.